Understanding Judaism and Zionism, thanks to Israel Shahak's book, Jewish History, Jewish Religion. Following, Prejudice and Prevarication. Following, The Deception Continues. Modern scholars of Judaism have not only continued the deception, but have actually improved upon the old rabbinical methods, both in impudence and in mendacity. I omit here the various histories of anti-Semitism as unworthy of serious consideration, and shall give just three particular examples and one general example of the more modern scholarly deceptions. In 1962, a part of the Maimonidean Code referred to above, the so-called Book of Knowledge, which contains the most basic rules of Jewish faith and practice, was published in Jerusalem in a bilingual edition with the English translation facing the Hebrew text. Note: published by Boys Town, Jerusalem, and edited by Moses Hiamson, one of the most reputable scholars of Judaism in Britain. End of note. The latter has been restored to its original purity, and the command to exterminate Jewish infidels appears in it in full. Quote, "It is a duty to exterminate them with one's own hands." End of quote. In the English translation, this is somewhat softened to, quote, "It is a duty to take active measures to destroy them." End of quote. But then the Hebrew text goes on to specify the prime examples of infidels who must be exterminated. Quote, "such as Jesus of Nazareth and his pupils, and Zadok and Baitos and their pupils, may the name of the wicked rot." Note: the supposed founders of the Sadducean sect, Zadok and Baitos. End of note. Not one word of this appears in the English text on the facing page 78a. And even more significant, in spite of the wide circulation of this book among scholars in the English-speaking countries, not one of them has, as far as I know, protested against this glaring deception. The second example comes from the USA, again from an English translation of a book by Maimonides. Apart from his work on the codification of the Talmud, he was also a philosopher, and his Guide to the Perplexed is justly considered to be the greatest work of Jewish religious philosophy and is widely read and used even today. Unfortunately, in addition to his attitude towards non-Jews generally and Christians in particular, Maimonides was also an anti-black racist. Towards the end of the guide, in a crucial chapter, Book 3, Chapter 51, he discusses how various sections of humanity can attain the supreme religious value, the true worship of God. Among those who are incapable of even approaching this are, quote, some of the Turks, i.e., the Mongol race, and the nomads in the north, and the blacks and the nomads in the south, and those who resemble them in our climates. And their nature is like the nature of mute animals, and according to my opinion, they are not on the level of human beings, and their level among existing things is below that of a man and above that of a monkey, because they have the image and the resemblance of a man more than a monkey does. End of quote. Now, What does one do with such a passage in the most important and necessary work of Judaism? Face the truth and its consequences? God forbid. Admit, as so many Christian scholars, for example, have done in similar circumstances, that a very important Jewish authority held also rabid anti-black views, and by this admission make an attempt at self-education in real humanity? Perish the thought. I can almost imagine Jewish scholars in the USA consulting among themselves. What is to be done? For the book had to be translated due to the decline in the knowledge of Hebrew among American Jews. Whether by consultation or by individual inspiration, a happy solution was found. In the popular American translation of the guide by one Friedlander, first published as far back as 1925, and since then reprinted in many editions, including several in paperback, the Hebrew word kushim, which means blacks, was simply transliterated, and appears as Cushites, a word which means nothing to those who have no knowledge of Hebrew, or to whom an obliging rabbi will not give an oral explanation. Note: I am happy to say that in a recent new translation, Chicago University Press, the word blacks does appear, but the heavy and very expensive volume is unlikely as yet to get into the wrong hands. Similarly, in early 19th century England, radical books such as Godwin's were allowed to appear, provided they were issued in a very expensive edition. End of note. During all these years, not a word has been said to point out the initial deception or the social facts underlying its continuation, and this throughout the excitement of Martin Luther King's campaigns, which were supported by so many rabbis, not to mention other Jewish figures, some of whom must have been aware of the anti-black racist attitude which forms part of their Jewish heritage. Note: an additional fact can be mentioned in this connection. It was perfectly possible and apparently respectable for a Jewish scholar of Islam, Bernard Lewis, who formerly taught in London and is now teaching in the USA, to publish an article in Encounter in which he points out many passages in Islamic literature which in his view are anti-black, but none of which even approaches the passage quoted above. It would be quite impossible for anyone now or in the last 30 years to discuss in any reputable American publication the above passage or the many other offensive anti-black Talmudic passages. But without a criticism of all sides, the attack on Islam alone reduces to mere slander. End of note. Surely one is driven to the hypothesis that quite a few of Martin Luther King's rabbinical supporters were either anti-black racists who supported him for tactical reasons of Jewish interest, wishing to win black support for American Jewry and for Israel policies, or were accomplished hypocrites to the point of schizophrenia, capable of passing very rapidly from a hidden enjoyment of rabbi racism to a proclaimed attachment to an anti-racist struggle, and back again. The third example comes from a work which has far less serious scholarly intent, but is all the more popular for that. The Joys of Yiddish by Leo Rosten. The light-hearted work, first published in the USA in 1968 and reprinted in many editions, including several times as a Penguin paperback, is a kind of glossary of Yiddish words often used by Jews or even non-Jews in English-speaking countries. For each entry, in addition to a detailed definition and more or less amusing anecdotes illustrating its use, there is also an etymology stating, quite accurately on the whole, the language from which the word came into Yiddish and its meaning in that language. The entry Shai Getz, whose main meaning is a Gentile boy or young man, is an exception. There, the etymology cryptically states Hebrew origin, without giving the form or meaning of the original Hebrew word. However, under the entry Shiksa, the feminine form of Shaigetz, the author does give the original Hebrew word Sheketz, or in his transliteration Shekes, and defines its Hebrew meaning as blemish. This is a barefaced lie, as every speaker of Hebrew knows. The Megiddo Modern Hebrew English Dictionary, published in Israel, correctly defines shakatz as follows: unclean animal, loathsome creature, abomination. Colloquial pronounced shaigetz, wretch, unruly youngster, Gentile youngster. My final, more general example is, if possible, even more shocking than the others. It concerns the attitude of the Hasidic movement towards non-Jews. Hasidism, a continuation and debasement of Jewish mysticism, is still a living movement with hundreds of thousands of active adherents who are fanatically devoted to their holy rabbis, some of whom have acquired a very considerable political influence in Israel, among the leaders of most parties, and even more so in the higher echelon of the army. What then are the views of this movement concerning non-Jews? As an example, let us take the famous Chataniya, fundamental book of the Chabad movement, one of the most important branches of Hasidism. According to this book, all non-Jews are totally satanic creatures, in whom there is absolutely nothing good. Even a non-Jewish embryo is qualitatively different from a Jewish one. The very existence of a non-Jew is inessential, whereas all of creation was created solely for the sake of the Jews.